So I'm a London-based correspondent for Le Monde. Since Brexit vote, my day has been pretty much dedicated to Brexit day in, day out, for better or worse. So that's something really close to my heart. And I should declare my interest as a Frenchman living here for 15 years. I feel pretty much like a European citizen living here as well. So my rights would be of high interest, and I would be very interested to know who is defending them. So we got four very interesting speakers. From the left, Anne-Laure Donskoy, you are the founder of the 3 Millions.
I wish, no.
One of the founders?
One of the co-founders.
One of the co-founders of the 3 Millions. And you've been in Britain for
32 years, probably for my sins, I don't know. Yes, I have been, and I live in Bristol, and I am definitely European. I'm also French. I'm a bit Russian, a bit Spanish, a bit Austrian, a bit human sometimes as well.
Just next to you, we got someone who is also an interesting mix, let's say. Niccolò Milanese, you are Director of European Alternative, which is a civil society organization, citizen movement promoting democracy, equality, culture beyond the nation state. You are a British citizen living in Paris, from Italian and Welsh origins, which makes you, I think, a pretty nice example of European.
Well, I hope I'm a nice example. My grandfather emigrated from Sicily in the 1950s to Wales to work in the coal mines, along with many, many other Sicilians. So you might know people from Italy in general. My father met my mother, who worked in the NHS in Cardiff. They moved to London. I was born some years later. I met my wife, who's French, here in London, and we moved to Paris, where we have 2 children.
Olivier Cadic, who is a senator from representing French living abroad. You're from the UDI, which is a federalist movement, center-right, and you've been in Britain for 21 years, you were telling me. You first moved here as a businessman and became an elected representative later on. And last but not least, Roger Casale. You used to be a Labour MP, and now you've been a founder of the New European, a civil rights movement, which campaigned for Europe at a time when nobody was talking about Europe or defending Europe here in Britain, which was just before the Bloomberg speech. The Bloomberg speech is, of course, the infamous speech when David Cameron promised a vote, and you created it just before that. And you've been defending European citizens since. Can I start with one quick question on those European rights? If you put your mind back on the 24th of June, 2016, 3 o'clock in the morning, we just learned that Sunderland voted Brexit at 70% or something like that. We know Brexit is about to win. What was your thought about what it meant for your rights, for European rights? And how does it compare to what you feel now? Do you think some progress have been made, and where are we? Let's start with you, Anne-Laure.
Well, for me, I went to bed, like a lot of us, went to bed late, and I kind of naturally woke up about 4:30 in the morning, and I thought, oh my God. It was shock, and a lot of us I know felt shock. It was really like I'd been punched into the stomach. I felt like the carpet had been pulled away from 30 years of my life, and I just cried and cried and cried. I just could not believe it, and it's only a bit later, after I spent a while feeling quite numb, that I became angry. And how do you channel this anger and turn it into something positive? Well, if you can. Well, I went to this first meeting of what was going to become the 3 million on the 10th of July, 2016. 2 weeks later, the 3 million was born. And yes, we have seen some progress. We have seen some progress because people like the 3 million have been very proactive from the beginning. We've been lobbying very hard, pretty much relentlessly, pretty much 7 days a week. If I say 24/7, it's not far off the truth. There's been times when we've spent the night writing papers, responding to technical notes from the EC, European Commission, from the European Parliament. So yes, there's been some progress, and if we have managed to at least begin to protect some of our rights, it's because of grassroots people, ordinary folks from all walks of life, all EU citizens have joined in unity, in real solidarity, which is quite rare, and it's really, we all need to actually to applaud ourselves for all the work, all the hard work that's happened, really. Because, you know, as Elena and Veronique have so eloquently showed, you know, we have been in limbo for actually nearly 21 months. And so we work very hard. You know, it's a world of, it's about, you know, it's very slow progress. Often we feel extremely frustrated that things don't go faster. You know, I'm working on a piece of research at the moment as a research associate. It's looking at the impact of Brexit, and I'm sure we'll come back to this later. But this is about solidarity. It's about all of us coming together and keep challenging the government, keep challenging the EU, so that all our rights, as they all promised, that nothing was changed. They all promised. So it's about all of us, each and every one of us, to, you know, to hold them to account that nothing will change.
Niccolo, you were on the other side of the channel. That grassroots movement, you must have felt quite lonely because that grassroots movement didn't happen on the other side of the channel, did it?
Did I feel lonely? Well, you know, at 3 a.m. I was sleeping because I have a young daughter who was about 1 at the time. It was a rare moment when she was asleep, and so I took the opportunity. But when I was woken up again by my beautiful daughter and I saw the results, I wasn't surprised, but of course I was saddened. Of course, it's an exaggeration to say one wasn't surprised. I was expecting Brexit to happen, but then, of course, when you see that it has happened, it's a slightly different thing. But I didn't feel lonely at all, because I, firstly, thought of my daughter, and I thought of her in a very specific sense. I thought of Jean Monnet in 1939, who was here in London working to build relations between the British and the French, and as you probably all know in this room, proposed at the moment when France was falling into the occupation of Franco-British Union, which Churchill accepted, but in the end never happened because there was too much chaos in France. And I thought on that night, well, the Franco-British Union didn't happen, but my children embody a kind of Franco-British Union and possibly something broader than that with Italian origins and so on. And so that actually gave me a great deal of hope, and I think that many of us in this room have those same reasons for hope, so I didn't feel lonely.
And 20 months on, so are you reassured compared to what you felt then?
No.
Go on.
No, I'm not. But I must say the other thing that I was concerned about during the referendum time, actually, was that everything wouldn't have been all right with citizens' rights even if Remain had won. Because, as you know, Cameron had been negotiating with the European Council to try and put in place an emergency brake and so on. So we mustn't get into the mindset that, you know, everything would have been all right if the result had been different. Things may have been better, but they wouldn't have been all right. So I was expecting a kind of battle on citizens' rights anyway. And I think that, you know, one of the positive things about Brexit that's already been said is that more and more people are now aware of how important that fight is. And we've got to spread the message further.
Right. Olivier, how did you feel on the 24th of June? But something very interesting maybe you can elaborate on. You told me just before this conference is how much thirst from the French people living here there was to know more about their rights just after the referendum, and how much you had packed room like that asking you questions just after the referendum.
Yeah, as everyone here, we all remember when we learned the Brexit result. Personally, we were in Senate and we had to to finish discussion at 1 a.m. and then I could go to bed because they announced good result coming, and Gibraltar was 95% remain. So I went to bed, and it was a positive moment, and so I remember that moment, my last good moment. And then 6:40 a.m. I received a phone call. Hello, it's France Info. We want an interview. Okay. We want to know your reaction. Okay, good. But do you know the result? No. I think they stay. No, not really. They will announce they will leave around 52, 53%. Please comment. Well, I remember really well this moment. And I plan to organize a conference on 30th of June in Edinburgh. Not really connected to Brexit, but because the French consulate closed on 30th of June in Edinburgh. So I had a meeting there already scheduled. And it was great because I never saw so many people coming to one of my conferences. Yeah, I enjoyed to have an assistance for once. But really, 5 days later, we organized another conference in London. We had more than 800 people. And then we decided to go in Bristol and to organize also a conference. And thanks to Nicolas Hatton, who is there, I organized that conference with him. And Nicolas had an idea. He said, okay, you do your conference in French. What do you think about doing it in English and to open it to all Europeans? I said, what a strange idea. And then, in fact, it was great because then we realized that all Europeans were living exactly the same thing. Everyone were really worried about the future. And I think they made a great move following this meeting to organize the 3 million, and I really want to thank you for all you did during this months because it was really helpful for me as a politician. Remember, my first job was to avoid that they stop freedom of movement in Europe. Remember, what did they want, the Brexiteers? They wanted to, in fact, to stay in Europe, but to limit the freedom of movement. And as a politician, my first job was to go in every European country to check with people from every government that they would not accept this. And we had a consensus on this side. And then what was the good thing, the good side of the Brexit is that Europeans were closer. And that's the first step. But it was not sure at that moment. And then I went to Ireland. I made a conference in Belfast. And it was my first time in Belfast. When I was in Edinburgh, I told everyone, the problem is not in Scotland, because some people in Scotland told me, what do you think if we want to stay? I said, the issue will not be here. The issue will be in Ireland. And today, the problem is still not fixed. And we don't have any clue on how they will fix this issue. And, you know, they all tell you that everything works well. Now, for Europe, and it's fixed. This meeting today is a wake-up call for me, because they gave me this book, Limbo, with all these testimonies on how you live this. They can make borders. They can try to create war. But we have one motto: freedom will always find its way.
So in a nutshell, no, you're not quite reassured yet on citizen rights, are you? Just very quickly on that point.
I'm like everyone. I'm waiting the final deal.
Yeah.
Every time they say we have a progress and it will be fine. Like Mrs. Theresa May, she said to French people with Mr. Macron in London, we need you, we want you to stay. Okay, show me the contract.
Roger, a British living in Britain, which makes you only person here, but with a European heart. How did you feel on the 21st of June, and how have your mind changed compared to 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago?
Well, I live in Italy and in Brussels now.
Apologies.
And I lived in Germany for a number of years, and I empathise very much with the position of everybody in this room. And I think that's what led us to set up New Europeans in 2013. So how I felt at 3 a.m. in the morning that night, well, as you say, we've been preparing for this contingency for 3 years, but still to see the tsunami arrive is a terrible shock. And it is a tsunami that is going to sweep away, potentially, not only our rights as EU 27 citizens in the UK and Britons in the EU, and Britons generally, because the British passport has been devalued by about 70% through the loss of free movement rights. But many other rights as well. We held a conference on Friday about all the other human rights aspects of this. We're trying to reframe this as a human rights issue, actually, the stripping away of these rights. And so what I did was actually set the alarm clock, because I knew that our contingency plan was to be at 9 o'clock on Old Palace Yard with our supporters, making a statement. And the statement was that we would fight for immediate, unilateral, comprehensive guarantees for all EU27 citizens. And we made that statement at 9 o'clock in the morning outside Parliament on the 24th of June, and that's what we've been trying to do ever since. And very quickly, we gathered several thousand signatures on a petition to David Cameron before he left office. And we know that David Cameron would have done that. And George Osborne told us that he would have done that and wanted to do that. But when they had the discussion in Cabinet 2 weeks after the referendum, there was a dissenting voice who said, no, you can't do that. You can't give immediate, comprehensive, unilateral guarantees. And that voice was the voice of Theresa May, who at that time was the Home Secretary. And there was another voice around the Cabinet table that subsequently said, no, we need to use, it more or less translated, EU citizens in the UK as bargaining chips. Now, this is a very, very serious moment, not just for all of us in this room and the 3.4 million EU citizens in the UK and the Britons in the EU who feel stranded with the loss of their EU citizens' rights, but also for Europe itself. Because I don't know about you, but I believe in a Europe of the citizens, a Europe of equality and social justice anchored in human rights. And I see this as a test not just for the UK, but also for the EU. The EU can give unilateral guarantees too to British citizens. I think we're very close to a solution. We have, you may have seen our proposal for a green card for Europe, which has reached quite a consensus now within the European Parliament. But I think we're quite close to a solution. But nobody can sleep well at night until we have not only those guarantees anchored in the law of this country and in the EU, but also in the withdrawal agreement itself. Both those things are necessary. It's not either or. We need both those things. We need action now, urgent action now. The government could have done it within 2 weeks of the referendum and has still failed to do so, and it needs to act now, today. But we also need those guarantees locked into for posterity, because what we all want is to be able to get this horrendous anxiety and uncertainty out of our lives so that we can go back to normal. There is absolutely no reason why anybody should lose any right at all as a result of Britain voting to leave the European Union. And I'm not going to stop fighting until we've achieved that. And thank you to all of you for the support that you give to us and to other organisations like the 3 Million, because we have got a voice, we have got rights, we do know how to make ourselves heard, and we will get this job done.
Can I just challenge you for 1 second? I'm just going to be the devil's advocate, because there's obviously no Brexiter, probably no Brexiter here, but there is a Brexiter government. And this idea that no one will lose any right, we might all be fighting for that, but is that really correct? I mean, do you really believe it's going to happen?
What I'm saying is that somebody who is here as an EU27 citizen enjoying their EU citizenship rights should find themselves in the future in exactly the same situation. Now, if somebody comes after the date when Britain leaves, which we now know has been postponed till December 2020, that's a different situation. But for anybody who was here, who made a life choice before the referendum, they should not have. So my answer to the Brexiteer was, if you want to have your little Brexit, have your little Brexit. Become your little Brit. Do what I think we're amongst friends here, so I can be rude. But not at the cost of the rights of EU 27 citizens in the UK. Not one single right should be lost.
Anne-Laure?
Well, remember what the government said. The government said, and it's in all the papers it's published about this, is that on the 29th of March 2019 at 11 p.m, all our rights will fall away. So we effectively lose all our rights on the 29th of March 2019 at 11 p.m. What the government is proposing is settled status, by which we will have to apply for rights. We will get less rights than the ones we have now. That's the crux. So you can imagine we can all fight, but we need to keep this one in mind. We are going to completely change status, therefore identity. We will become the other.
Can you spell out what rights are we, because I'm a European living here, going to lose?
Family reunification is one.
Family reunification being you can bring someone from abroad, elderly
mum and dad. It's going to become far more complex than it is at the moment.
Under the current proposals?
Yes.
Despite the agreement from the EU?
Yes. And there are other issues, the outstanding issues which haven't been sorted yet, which I think we really need to stress here. So there's family reunification. There's recognition of professional and academic qualifications. At the moment, all these are covered. If you've been studying in the UK for a 3-year and plus degree, that's recognized across the EU because we all agree on, the different standards that we have. And it's also protected by an international treaty, which is the Bologna Treaty. Degrees started before Brexit will be recognized. Those started after Brexit will not be recognized at the moment, unless it's small, agreements, etc. But what happens in the middle, who knows? The issue of cross-border workers, they also rely on their qualifications to work, as well as freedom of movement. And that also affects EU citizens who do work in the EU on a regular basis. And as I said, the process of applying for settled status, which is not a state, it's a status which is a conditional status. So it's you apply on certain conditions and you are granted or not your rights. This is a completely different system from the one we've been used to, which has been guaranteed and framed within EU legislation. Now you could say, okay, fine, Brexit, UK leaves the EU, therefore you can do what it wants. Wrong. As far as I'm concerned, as far as the 3 million is concerned, we came here in good faith. Under EU legislation, we have made life choices based on rights. And this is what we need to keep focus on. This is the most important thing here. Rights, our rights, and these rights will be taken away. And if we're lucky, we get this new status.
Niccolo, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, firstly to underline the importance of what Anne-Laure just said about the difference between a declaratory system of rights and having to prove and apply for those rights, because there's a danger of setting a precedent right across Europe, actually. And that precedent is that Brexit sends the message that if you exercise your free movement rights, you're at risk, because those rights could potentially be taken away from you, and you might have to apply to try and justify them. And that, unfortunately, could be a risk for UK people in the rest of the EU, for EU people here, or who knows in the future as a precedent for how that sort of thing might be used by different governments. So I think that's a really dangerous precedent, and it's why it's crucial to emphasise that absolutely no right should be taken away by a democratic or decision or otherwise. Secondly, I think that what's on the paper, and there's lots of talk about what's on paper these days with the negotiations, is one thing. What the government is actually doing is quite another thing, and we should know that the number of expulsions of European citizens, the number of detentions of European citizens has been rising considerably over recent years, massively, some newspapers would say. The number of arrests and attempts at deportation for apparently petty crimes like drinking alcohol in public or being found to be sleeping in a park, these kinds of things, has increased dramatically. Theresa May is, after all, Prime Minister, and so those of us who've been following her career shouldn't be so surprised.
It had started before Brexit, didn't it?
It started before Brexit, but it's increased massively since. Yeah. So that's the second thing to underline. You'll have noticed if you follow that this business of comprehensive sickness insurance, the UK government keeps on saying, well, don't worry about that, and it keeps on creeping its way back into different texts. The idea that EU citizens here might actually need to be able to prove that they have comprehensive sickness insurance to be able to stay, and that the NHS wouldn't be good enough. So these things, there's clearly a continual push to limit rights, and we should keep our eyes on the reality of what's happening and not just on the text that's on the paper. Last thing that I say for the moment is that Should I Stay or Should I Go is a good title because it comes from a song, but I want to reject the premise. I want to stay and I want to go. I want to come and go as I please. And this, it seems to me, is the meaning of European citizenship.
Olivier, you've heard those technical details about what's still to be resolved, and the aspiration about you want to come and go as we please. Is it something that's heard at the French government or in the Senate? Because there's been actually, after all, an agreement between the EU and London on the citizenship right. It's nothing is agreed until everything is agreed, but on principle it is agreed. So it looks like those details have not been solved yet and not been heard yet.
That's why a day like today is important, very important. And I would like to start by, I talked about all the conferences I organized, but from day one, I was with someone special, Patricia Connell. She did everything, and she's still today organizing meetings. I'm in the Senate. I'm part of the Brexit committee, where we have half members are coming from
at the Senate.
At the Senate, so we have dedicated senators to this issue. I think that a day like today make me realizing that maybe we thought something was fixed where it's not. And I think you're right. Again, when I said I spent some time to discuss with the writer of In Limbo and all these testimonies, I think they need in the Senate to listen and listen again. And my goal would be to organize a hearing with the committee to allow you, the 3 million, again, to come back and say, hey, maybe there is something wrong at the moment, and we have to come back on it. I think it's important. And again, to be a representative for me, I'm a businessman. What I've done in my business, I did it because we work as a team. And I think it's really important. We still work the same way. So I will need you to come in the Senate to be heard.
Today, of course, is not quite any day. There's been the implementation period agreed, as they say here, so the transition period until 2020. And we were talking just before, you were saying the text has been slightly modified for this implementation period, including something on the citizen rights. Can you explain to me exactly? Or maybe it was Niccolò.
More about that.
Well, I mean, the small point we were talking about before is that...
It's slightly technical, but it looks like, it sounded like it's important. Go ahead.
There are probably more points. The one I was talking about is free movement rights in particular, that and this is to give people hope that things are moving a little bit in the negotiations, and it's important to keep up the pressure, because up until today, in the draft withdrawal agreements that had been circulated, there was an explicit clause saying that British citizens living in the rest of the European Union, so for example me, would lose our free movement rights. So I would be able to continue to live in Paris, where I live, but I wouldn't be able to move, for example, to Berlin if I wanted to, as I would lose that right. That clause in the agreement has been deleted from the version that has been circulated today. It's been deleted, but it's still referred to in other parts of the text. So there's no guarantee that actually any free movement rights have been given. There does seem to be the assurance that the thing has been put together quite quickly because it's not consistent. But one can ask oneself, why has this been deleted? What's going to replace it? And I think that that's obviously a concern for British people in the rest of the European Union. But given that these are negotiations in which things are reciprocated, it's an indication as well that perhaps if we put enough pressure, more positive things will come for EU citizens.
Yeah, it sounds like a step in the right direction. I mean, it's an unclear... Yeah, okay.
For the moment, no one knows. But there's a blank hole there where there was something bad before. And our job is to fill that blank hole with something good. Okay.
Roger.
Well, I think if we're going to have a round of applause, we ought to have a round of applause for the European Parliament, because I think the European Parliament... Well, let's give them a round of applause. the European. Because they are doing their job here, and they're not as powerful as I would like them to be, but they are really playing a binder on this one. And what they said in their resolution in December on the draft withdrawal agreement was that they wouldn't accept a withdrawal agreement which stripped British citizens in the EU of their freedom of movement rights. The problem is they haven't got a way to actually give those back the way that the legislation is at the moment, which is why we have put forward the idea of the green card. Now, the idea of the green card is that once you establish that somebody is a permanent resident of an EU member state, you issue them, you, the European Commission, issue, in this case, a British person in the EU, like Niccolò or in France or me in Italy, you issue us with a green card which gives us back that package of rights that we currently enjoy as EU citizens, by virtue of the fact no longer that we're British passport holders, because Britain will no longer be a member state, but that we are permanent residents of an EU member state. And what you say to EU 27 citizens in the UK is that once you have whatever system we have in store with us, and we'll come back to this because I think it's absurd that people should have to pay for something that they have a right to already, but that's another point. Once somebody's residency is secure, you say life will carry on as normal. So in particular, you get back your right to stand and to vote in a local election. So now, I think that something is cooking, and that is why this has been taken out of the of the latest draft. And so watch this space. We are asking you, and I know that I don't want to sort of cut across other campaigns that are going on, but we are asking people to write to the Brexit Steering Group, that's Guy Verhofstadt, and the other members of this Brexit Steering Group. Please write a handwritten letter, not an email. That has much more impact. And say that you want this. You want something that will actually allow your life to return to normal if Britain leaves the EU, and that will give you back that package of rights, because the European Parliament are on our side. They are asking for this, and I think pretty soon we will see the Commission come forward with some kind of new instrument. Whether I don't think they'll call it the green card, because they'll think that sounds too American. It doesn't matter what they call it. What's important is that we get our rights back, and we get them back now. And as I say, I can't promise that that's what we're going to get, but I can promise if we don't ask for it, it's less likely that we'll get it than if we do. So please join with us and fight for this, because I think that there are signs, and what Niccolo's just been talking about in terms of the mysterious disappearance of clauses from agreements, that something is brewing, and it could well be this. I hope it is.
So it's going to be called the blue card with yellow stars on it, yeah.
Well, they've already got a blue card which they use for something else. It doesn't really matter what it's called. What's important is that the principle, and the principle is that once you have established that you have residency, that you then get back the package, the full package of rights. In the case of British in the EU, that's the really one that screams out that you need to get back is your freedom of movement rights within the territory of the EU. Yeah. And for EU27 citizens here, the one that really screams out is the one about local standing and voting in local elections. And you base those, you base that not on nationality, but on your right to residency. Now, I think the EU is going to have to come up with a scheme and put it forward. And a lot of what is being said at the moment in terms of how this is being talked about, instead of saying we have the British over here and we have the EU27s over here, the EU is recognising, if you listen very carefully to what people are saying, British people living in the EU are children of Europe and not just the UK. They are EU citizens. And it is a test, as Niccolò said, because if the EU get this wrong, the whole idea of freedom of movement could unravel in the EU. So it's really incumbent on the EU to reach out, reach above itself, not go down to the lowest common denominator represented by Theresa May and Liam Fox, but actually to say Europe is a space in which we guarantee human rights. This is a human rights issue. The uncertainty, the taking away of rights makes it a human rights issue in our view. And we look to the institutions. The European Parliament is doing very well, but it needs to be the Commission and the Council as well. I'm not quite sure we'll get Mr. Orban on side, but maybe we don't need unanimity for this. But it's really important that we speak up and we say this is what we want. We want life to return to normal for us if Britain does leave, with all our rights guaranteed. And the green card is a way to deliver that.
Anne-Laure.
The latest draft, which was published this lunchtime, shows that, as Niccolò's pointed out, there's still so much ambiguities in how citizens' rights are approached and negotiated, that the devil is in the detail, and the devil will definitely be even more in the detail. And we really need to push for as much detail as possible to be in the withdrawal agreement that will very clearly say how things will happen, how they will happen, when they will happen, and what sort of oversight we will get. We do fight against the 8-year, what they call sunset clause, which means that after 8 years, there will not be any further oversight by the European Court of Justice. And that's a great pity, because that means that the UK government, therefore, could pretty much, okay, there'll be an international treaty, but what will be the actual mechanisms to ensure that our rights are properly implemented, after 8 years, that runs the risk of being extremely weakened. So we need to really push for as much detail as possible in the withdrawal agreement. That's one thing. The second thing is, we all know that these are volatile times. Every day we hear this is happening in the government is polarized. And, there's quite a few commentators and quite a few Tory MPs and cross-party MPs who do support the idea of ring-fencing our rights now. Because what happens if there's no deal? We fall back on some kind of horrible, UK immigration framework, which will definitely take a lot of our rights away, which will weaken our positions here as citizens. So we need to call for and put pressure on all institutions in the UK and the EU to have our rights ring-fenced now. It can be done in different ways. It is allowed under the Article 50 that we could have either something like a citizens' agreement or a protocol that guarantees this right, so that at least what's in the joint report in December, at least that much is saved, so that we don't fall back on the UK immigration system.
Should I open to the floor, maybe? I'm not sure how much time we have. We have 2 minutes. Okay, well, let's open to the floor. Is there a microphone somewhere, sir?
Oh, him again. I need to give a voice to somebody.
Oh.
I am a British citizen.
Hold on, let's...
Thank you. Would it not be possible to... I'm a British citizen. Excuse me.
Hold on.
You wait for the mic. Wouldn't it not be possible under the European Convention of Human Rights to build up a court case that would come to bear on the loss of any citizen's rights if there was to be a difference between the treatment of EU citizens in the UK versus the EU 27, and the same for British citizens in Europe versus in the UK, because there's clearly a loss of human rights. There is a court. It's not it would create a threat to the UK government to live up to its obligations.
I think there's a lawsuit being brought by British citizens in the Netherlands, but is there a lawyer in the room? Someone can tell me.
Gina Miller did mention it earlier. That's the case that she mentioned earlier, which is now will go to the European Court, which is great news. At least it's a test. We don't know what will happen with it. It may fail. Some people are commenting and saying, yes, it probably will fail. But it's a test, and it's a really interesting test. Mm-hmm. And it's a test of the European identity as well, what it means to be a European today and a European citizen.
Roger?
We do think this issue needs to be reframed as a human rights issue. We're trying to do that, and we're looking for test cases potentially to bring to the European Court that at the very least would make the politicians kind of redo their risk analysis. And I just want to say this, though, that the test of human rights or civil rights, or the rights test, is really whether it protects the most vulnerable in society. So we need to have something that is going to protect the rights of the disabled, of victims of domestic violence, of foster children, of the many, many different groups of people, the kinds of people that that Niccolò was talking about, who get maybe drunk and disorderly and get arrested and thrown out. They have rights too. And I think that if we end up with a situation where the most vulnerable rights are protected, then we will all be fine too. But that's really the test, and that's the point we need to get to, and we're a very long way from that at the moment.
One last question. There was someone. Yes, please, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you. I just quite agree with Roger, what he said, and also Anne-Laure. You see, the case that just came up here, Elena and Veronique, that's the story of 3 million people here. And everybody is in limbo. So what I would say that you have got only 1 year to go before the withdrawal date. Just 1 year, 29th of March, 2019. So time has come to take appropriate action now. If you do not take any action, if you do not exercise this democratic right, as Gina Miller has said, if you do not take your treaty right properly and the legal right, you will miss this opportunity. It is a two-way traffic. It is not only the British government to decide, it is the 27 EU national to decide before the agreement reached on the 29th of March. And I have got a vested interest here because my wife is also EU national for 30 years, almost 30 years. So that's what I say, that since you have organized a very good organization here, you should put forward now. You should not stop. It's another year, not only here in the UK, you should go out on the 27 countries, lobbying their prime minister and presidents to make a proper and appropriate case for the EU citizen, 3 million here and 1 million there.
Thank you.
And that should be my request.
That's what I've been doing for 20 months, isn't it?
Yeah. That's precisely, certainly the 3 million has an EU team, as it were, and we have representatives from all 27 nations, and we do lobby all 27 nations, in person. We go to Brussels, we talk to the permanent representatives in Brussels and elsewhere. We go to the countries. I presented in the French National Assembly less than a month ago to the Mission Brexit to enlighten them, because they needed a lot of enlightenment about what's going on for their citizens. So yes, we do. We are active. We may not be, visible all the time, but we are working on this.
Excellent job.
And we have less than a year.
Yeah, excellent job. Everybody should support Anne-Laure, what she is doing there. Everybody should be alert now, because they will not honor you unless you stand up and fight both ways. Not only UK, you have to fight 27 countries over there. And then I tell you one news, that they have already changed the 206 regulations EU regulations. Now it's 2016 regulation, which is much more harder. If they come out with a hard Brexit, we will not get anything here. And it will be under the mercy of the British law. And they treat you as an EU migrant, not a EU citizen.
Thank you.
So that you have to distinguish.
Thank you. One last word to the three of you. Niccolò?
I think that legal activism is really important. When it comes from citizens, the danger is it often comes too late, when some rights have already been lost and we try to contest their loss. One actor that doesn't have to wait often quite as far as citizens is the European Commission, which could launch infringement proceedings against the UK over several issues when it comes to the expulsion of EU citizens, which is already happening. And we should urge the European Commission to do that now before it loses the opportunity once the UK has left. But I wanted to say that legal activism, lobbying of governments, both really important, but they have to be completed by political activism. That means voting, it means standing in elections like the gentleman here, but it also means getting involved in political parties, trying to change the opinions and views of those political parties, not only here in this country, but I really think we have to frame this as a European fight, because it is ultimately about human rights. It's about the rights of every single European citizen and all of those people on the European territory. We need to frame it like that, and we need to explain to citizens across the continent that there's a political fight on our hands. One of the fronts of it is in this country to do with Brexit. It's not the only front. Think of what's happening in Hungary at the moment under Orban and in other countries. There's plenty of people wanting to crack down on citizens' rights in all kinds of domains, and we need to link up and perhaps create new political forces to fight it.
Olivier?
Very briefly, we are at minus 375 days now.
Something like that.
Roughly something. I would say that all the countries will be very happy if British change their mind.
Right. Roger?
Very simply, EU27 citizens have been treated like children in this country, seen and not heard. But I'm looking around the room, I can't see any children. We're adults, we have a voice, we will be heard. And I think we have to stand up and make sure that we are heard. And the local elections that are coming up are a very good opportunity to exercise our rights and make our voice heard. Congratulations to the excellent work that the 3 million are doing to have a voice, a real voice for EU citizens in the UK. European Alternatives are also working in that area and many other organisations. And I think the challenge to us now, all of us as organisations, is what can we do to make to reach out to groups beyond our own organisations, to mobilise even more EU27 citizens, because believe me, it's not over yet. And when we've dealt with this, there's going to be plenty more where this came from, and we really need to learn from what's gone on and the situation we're now in, and organise ourselves better in the future so that this kind of thing never happens again.
There's a lot more we can talk about. Sadly, we're out of time. Please thank the 4 panelists. They were brilliant.